Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum was launched to inform, inspire, motivate diverse talent to join the energy workforce by intentional recognition of current female energy leaders who contribute to growing Florida's economy and the purposeful sharing of their professional journeys. We are creating opportunity. Join me each week as we meet new leaders in energy and listen to their important roles in an industry that is vital to the country's future. Welcome to all the viewers. Thank you for joining us this week for the Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum interview and podcast to be heard next week. I'm with the great Paula Glover today, the president and CEO of the American Association of Blacks in Energy, ABE, and Ron Brise, who's former member of the Florida House of Representatives, former chair of the Florida Public Service Commission. Thrilled to have both of you to talk about a topic near and dear to all of our hearts, a serious topic, the importance of diversity in utility corporations and on the regulators bench, the Public Service Commissions around the country. I know that these are topics near and dear to you each because you've devoted your life to this conversation, Paula. I want the audience to really get to know you and what drives you. And I want to start with the career path that you undertook. Do you want to talk about your experience before ABE and how you got to ABE?
Sure. When I got out of college, after flitting around through the summer and enjoying my life as if I had no responsibilities, my mother kindly reminded me that I had to get a job. And so I was working with a temp agency that placed me in the gas company that was maybe a mile from the house that I grew up in. And I didn't know what they did. I had no idea that this company existed. And I started working for them temporarily, and then I got a full-time job. And my first job, and I won't share all my jobs, but this job was particularly impactful for me and has literally informed everything that I've done since then. And my first job was taking payments from customers and having customers walk in and sit at my desk. There was no barrier. There was no, none of that. They came in the building. They sat right down at my desk behind my cubicle. They read the computer the way that I was reading it, and either paid their bill. We might negotiate if they had been turned off, trying to move, all of those kinds of customer transactions. And it was informative and important to me because you really got to see what customers actually went through on a day and how hard it was for some customers. And that even if with my role at the gas company was just to get our money, like it wasn't that simple for people, that there were lots of things that folks had to consider, that there were a lot of individuals who were struggling. And that even during that time, I got to see how changes in public policy made it even easier, but most times made it more difficult for those same exact customers to pay bills and meet their daily needs. And so I started doing that. And then I moved around the gas company and had a couple other roles in community affairs and economic development, and then worked for a light company and worked in regulatory affairs and legislative affairs. And I loved that work because it really exposed me to how our company made money. I didn't really understand how utility companies made money. I didn't know what a regulatory construct was. I didn't have any of that. And once I begun to see that, it just really then made all the other stuff kind of make sense, right? I was like, oh, okay, I get why they made that decision. At the same time, I was a member of the association. I joined the association, quite frankly, because it was called Blacks in Energy, and I was in an all-white environment. And if that's what was going to get me around other Black people, I was not cued into like, what is their mission and what do they do? At 25, I didn't really care. I was like, I need to get around people who had a shared experience with me, and that was important. But the work of the organization around public policy and customers, that intersection that the association has been so focused on for 40 years, drew me in such a way that I never, ever, ever want to leave the energy business. You know, even if I didn't like the company I was working for or my boss or whatever that was. And I never want to leave the energy business. I just really fell in love with the business and had a real appreciation for how in our everyday jobs, we could have a tremendous impact on communities. That people won't necessarily know or recognize, and that it's not important that they know or recognize, but that you can do real impactful things just by doing your work. And then providing education, guidance, and insights to others about how your work impacts their lives, and how we make decisions and if we should change those decisions. And so for a brief time before I came to the association, I worked for a nonprofit. It's in the regional YMCA, which was also a really great experience to kind of see the world and see a community through another set of eyes outside of kind of my corporate set of eyes. And then I came to work for Abe, and I've been here for 12 years. And I love it. It's interesting. I think the most interesting thing is I work with people now, or have board members now who have known me since like, you know, before I got married. And some of them will say, I remember when you first got out of college. I remember when you got married. I remember when you first had those kids. And then, you know, they'll say, how are the kids now? And I say 26. And they're like, what? 26? No, they were babies. And so they've watched me grow up. But they've also fed into that growth. Absent them, none of the other stuff would have happened. And so, you know, this natural kind of intersection of just mentors and mentorship and sponsorship and guidance, but honestly, just love and honest assessment, and people just like saying, I'm going to tell you the truth and then help you to figure it out. So that's kind of what happened.
You know, Paula, the other thing that happens, and we're going to come back to this, so I want you to think about it as I ask Ron this question, is the other thing that's happened over your career is women who look like you, Paula, are watching you as well.
Yeah.
And they're inspired to join the industry. We should also mention that Abe has a Florida chapter. And if anyone is interested in joining, and I hope that they are, they can join the Florida chapter as well. abeflorida.org.
Please do.
Yeah. So, Ron, when you and I first spoke about the Public Service Commission, I remember sharing with you that it is one of the few opportunities in a career where you can touch every single Floridian. And in many ways, it's more humbling and more effective even than serving in the Florida legislature, where clearly you impact your own constituency and in your elected region, but the Florida PSC gave you a statewide platform. Do you want to reflect on your time on the Florida PSC?
Sure, certainly. And so glad to join both of you today. And it's always great to be with both of you in these conversations. So it feels like we're home in these conversations. So, you know, my path to the commission was different than the path of many. Just a little bit of color to my background. So I used to be a science teacher, like way back in the day. My first job out of college was a biology teacher, biology, anatomy, and physiology, and throw in some physics back in the day.
Not everyone can say that. I'm sorry. You go on and throw that physics in. Go right ahead.
On in there.
And so I also had the opportunity after I left teaching to run a company, run a telecom company that had primary focus in the Central America region, South America, and the Caribbean. So my approach and interaction was from an operator perspective, as well as what the legislature informed me was the consumer perspective as well. You know, I got the calls as a legislator when things weren't going right, if I could interface on their behalf with whoever the utility company, whether it's water, phone, or electricity. So when I joined the commission, one of the things that was top of mind for me was how do we help the commission help Floridians understand what the commission does, right? I mean, I think most people to this day, you ask them, what does your public service commission do for you? And you will get a blank stare, right? And except when there is a high profile rate case, or you have, in Florida, we have hurricanes. So after a hurricane, people will, their interest will peak during that particular period of time. But another component that was of great importance to me and continues to be, when I served in the legislature, we used to have this roundup. So some of us from the Black Caucus used to do a roundup with agency heads. And we would ask them, you know, let's see your numbers. Let's see how you're doing in procurement, how you're doing in executive leadership, and so forth in terms of diversity. And so when I joined the commission, the Florida Commission has had a history of commissioners who have had that focus and interest. And so one of my areas of interest naturally was to bring that to the commission as well. And so it was interesting to see that you can have 5 people that look at the same information, hear the same testimony, and arrive at sometimes the same conclusions, but for so many different reasons. And so the data is the same, the presentations are the same, but your life experience brings you to the conclusion based upon how you look at those facts. And those things inform your decision in such a way that your emphasis may be different than the colleague that's sitting next to you, but you arrive at the same conclusion. Sometimes you don't arrive at the same conclusion. And you push on things that, as people are testifying, you push on things, or you prod in certain areas that your other colleagues may not prod in, because that's not their experience, right? And so one of the things for me was, what are you doing in terms of language diversity in the state of Florida, right? There are people from a variety of places, from different places in the world in Florida. And so how can your customers interact with you if they don't fully understand what you're asking of them? So one of the things that we pushed on was that. One of the other things
I
that,
remember. So, Ron, let's elaborate on that. I remember that like yesterday. You, at the time, the commission was only translating their news releases, right, and the special bulletins, I think in English and Spanish, obviously.
that's
You
correct.
came along and said, well, you know, the
Right.
electric company, the largest electric company in the state, serves predominantly the South Florida area. And, you know, how many languages are there? So you had them translate those notices in several languages, correct?
Right. Absolutely. It was like, look, you sort of need to look at the pockets, and look at the people, and then make sure that the people have access to the information in the language. Now, if you weren't doing the languages for anybody, then I get that. But if we're going to do languages and translations, then we need to do that so that all the customer that speak different languages are represented and have the opportunity to see the information in first language for
Yeah.
them.
And Ron, how many languages do you speak?
On a good day, I speak about 4 languages on a good day.
Yeah. I tease Ron, I'm going to write a book about all the things that people don't know about Ron Brise. What are you doing now, Ron? What's your job now?
Right now, I lead the practice group, the government affairs practice group at Gunster. Great group of people. So, you know, we try to help people connect with government, understand how government works, and we've got a healthcare regulatory shop, and healthcare lawyers. We have environmental lawyers. We have PSC lawyers, and then we have a full lobby shop that. If anyone needs to understand and connect, they can reach out to any one of our team, any one of the members of our team at Gunster in the government affairs practice, and we can certainly help them.
And we thank you today for sponsoring the interview and the podcast. Gunster is today's sponsor. So, Ron, let me pitch this question to you and then send it on to Paula. So, in your private practice, I'm assuming you're getting the same question I'm getting from companies. Where do we start? How do we assess what we have internally to understand where changes are appropriate to increase our inclusiveness and to really address racial equity? The good news about that is companies are asking the question. I have mixed emotions with regard to they're not knowing where to start, but I have to believe that that's an opportunity for you on multiple levels.
Absolutely. And I look at it as any company that has anything that they consider to be important, the first thing to do is to ask the question, right? And so if the question is not being asked, then the issue is not even being considered. So the good thing is that the question is being asked. So if there was a shortfall in revenue somewhere for some reason or the other, you would ask the question, why are we having this issue or this shortfall?
Great
And
point.
so the natural steps are, let's look internally. And what are we doing internally to identify first where and how much that shortfall is? And what are the steps that we need to take in order to address that, right? Are there external factors that are impacting that, or are those factors primarily internal? So what processes do we have internally to accurately determine where that shortfall is coming from? So I think that one of the things that companies can do, and I've said this before, it's great to say that you're going to support something that's being done by somebody else, or you're going to put some dollars out to support a particular initiative. That's fantastic. But if you're not coupling that with something that supports your team internally, so that they are wondering, why are you doing something that's outward facing while you're not doing anything that's inward facing? That creates some sort of an interesting rub in terms of what your employees and team members are feeling versus what they're seeing, the message is that's going out in the public. So I would say the first thing to do is to do an assessment, an internal assessment as to, one, do your team members feel comfortable enough to be who they are in their own skin at work, right? That's basic. Do your team members have the opportunity to express their thoughts and opinions freely within the organization as to the things that they consider to be important to them? Then more structural type of things. Take a look at your boards, right? Take a look at your leadership teams. Take a look at your succession plans, and all those type of things to see what you are doing and if it's reflective of the message that you're projecting out to the public with respect to social justice and things of that nature. Diversity comes in so many different forms. People are diverse from their backgrounds, they're diverse in terms of their professions and all these other types of things. And I think that applies to all of that. But there are certain things that you can't change, right? When I walk in a room, you know who I am, and there's nothing I can do, or nor do I want to change who I am. And so therefore, making sure that all the team members, when they walk in the room, the comfort level is the same for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's probably the biggest thing that companies can do internally, and that should happen across the entity. And so whether it's the team of line workers or the team of customer service reps, they might be comfortable because they may see a lot of others that look like them. But as people go up the ladder, it begins to shrink the number of people that look like them. Well, we need to keep that parity and equity as we go up the ladder, because the decisions that are made by the people in the executive suite or the C-suite, the decisions that are made by management will better reflect the communities which are served. And ultimately, that's what matters. It's the communities that are being served. We moved away from the term ratepayer, right? Um, but the communities that are paying for the service, or the customers that are paying for the service, at the end of the day, they're the ones that matter. And if the decisions that are being made do not reflect their experience, then we're not doing right by those customers.
Excellent, Ron. Thank you for that. And Paula, I'm seeing changes. I mean, albeit slow, albeit
Yep.
sometimes frustrating, but I think I shared with you a few days ago the Southern Company video, and we're seeing all energy companies really, frankly, all companies, not just the energy companies, but for purposes of our conversation, energy companies self-reflect. What are you seeing from your membership, and where did they start, Paula?
Yeah, I think I saw the same. A lot of companies self-reflecting. And it's been interesting, right? We all knew, I think, inherently that every company is on a different kind of journey, and they're all starting from different places. But those companies who had already started doing something, and that means they probably had a formalized DEI program or supplier diversity programs, I think it was much easier for them to lean in because they had already started doing something. And so they could expand upon that work and then add on to it. For those organizations that haven't done anything, and the truth is that there are a lot of organizations that actually haven't done anything, just as many, those are the ones who've had the most trouble starting because they don't know where to start. What I'm seeing, though, and I so agree with Ron's statement, is that this moment starts with reflecting on who your company is and who are you as an organization and what do you do and what are you doing, and does the company behave in such a way that reflects the values that they say they have? And they're large entities, so sometimes there's an enormous disconnect between what the senior leadership and the board says is a priority and how that plays out for line managers and others, and ultimately even how that plays out in terms of interaction with customers. And so, I think the positive thing about this moment is probably that there's more of a recognition that actually exists and that we need to do something about it. The other side of it, though, I think for me, and probably the part, not that I used to struggle with this and I don't anymore, I will say, is that this moment that we're in, so much about this is race equity, right? And that's the thing that I think for companies is really most difficult to confront, that there are disparities sometimes in our organizations that are absolutely driven by race for whatever reason, right? Because it started out that way and people never caught up. But I think there's been an overwhelming recognition that we've got to deal with the inequities in our systems and understand not only how we got there, but then what do we do to pivot and kind of get out of that situation and change the narrative. The diversity narrative used to be that if you do for increased representation of women or African Americans or Latinos or whatever, what you're doing then is taking away from somebody else. And I think what I'm most feel the best about is that narrative has seemed to diminish and that there's a recognition that this is actually not about taking away from anybody, but that the playing field was never level. As many times as we said that the playing field was level, it wasn't. And the inequities exist because it wasn't. And now we have to figure out how we're going to do it. And that doesn't mean that it's equal and the same for everyone. That actually means that some people may need more help, different types of accommodations, so that we all kind of can get on some even footing and then really be able to compete, really get that opportunity to compete that we all kind of want. For our association, what I'm finding, certainly through my members, is that they want to have hard conversations. People are tired of being silent. People are tired of walking through their organizations, even while we're working from home, and acting as if what is going on in the world around us does not impact us, because it does. It just does, and it continues to do so. This weekend, my daughter, who was in Rochester, called me at midnight, and I jumped out of my skin because I knew that they were protesting. I knew that she was protesting, and I just did not know. Like, I was grateful she called, but I was like, are you calling me from jail? Like, what is going on? But I've gotten calls from my kids in the middle of the night before, and I was equally as afraid because I didn't know if it was a police officer on the other end of that phone, or if my child had been pulled over, and what the result of that was. And so I think for many of my members, we are tired of acting like that does not exist in our lives just because we are Black professionals. In spite of the fact that we're African American professionals, all these other social compacts still exist, and we still have to find ways to sometimes protect ourselves from those dynamics, certainly protect our families, and then still show up at work, right, and do what we're required to do. And so this has really been
frankly
better.
than our
Oh,
neighbor.
absolutely better. But this, I think, has been a moment where more people are like, I'm kind of done with hiding. Like, I just have to lay it out there, and that our organization
What
are more
has made
receptive.
this different, Paul? I'm interrupting because I
Yeah.
want to get from you and Ron. The fundamental thing I've noticed different this last 3-4 months that frankly stemmed from the very tragic death starting. It didn't start with George Floyd. Sadly, it started many years ago, and we're finding out more now because of the power of social media and the cell phones and being able to take a video and a picture right away. But what I have found, I think for me, different the last 3, 4, 5 months is the emotion that's coming from all of us, and Black people in particular, and they're bringing that emotion to their jobs. And so now it's affecting morale in the office. And I think companies, in an effort also to comply with their ESG policies, right, and to really impact what shareholders expect of them, there's a sense of urgency like I've never seen before.
Yeah, there is. I think, the ESG point is an interesting one because for some organizations, it absolutely is like, how do I respond to this investor need? But you know what? I just did an interview with Chris Womack at Southern Company,
Yes.
For Public Utilities Fortnightly. And one of the things that he talked about in terms of Southern's journey, and the commercial that you share with us makes sense, is because he said this is not about compliance. So it's actually not about, for them, the ESG. This is about what is the right thing for us to be doing. And that if we're going to be, as I would describe, a socially responsible organization that is trying to partner with and serve a larger community, then we have to care about what's going on in that community, and not just the things that impact us, but things that impact the community. The other thing, though, I think is different is that, right, cell phones, that we're all home, that we're all watching this live and in color,
right,
24 hours a day. But that also for many of our organizations, those protesters out in the street are the same people who work for you. Right? They're not a bunch of strangers. They are people who work for you, and then they come to work. And so I think that also makes it different. And then seeing images, quite frankly, of many of our leaders who are also out there kind of, right, trying to fight this fight and give voice to what's happening. And maybe a recognition that it's only our collective voices that are going to make any kind of change. Like, the old way just has not worked. And so this is the new way. We collectively have to all care about this stuff. And if we care about it, if we purport to care about it, then we have to say something. And we can't rely on somebody else to say it for us. We have to use that collective. So I think all of those things are different. But I would suggest, what COVID not only made us stay home, but it really made us see what has been going on, certainly in Black and Brown communities, for decades, right? But the results of, right, more Black and Brown deaths from COVID was a result of underinvestment in healthcare, education, workforce development, like all this other stuff actually fed into those results. And I think I hate to use the phrase a perfect storm because it's not perfect, but it's absolutely what was required, I think, for people to see in its entirety kind of the systems that we have created and how our communities have really been left behind in significant ways in multiple fronts.
We have our first question, and I would encourage the viewers, feel free to use the Q&A section of the live interview and submit questions. We want your questions. So our first question, Ron, and I'm going to come back to you too. Well, let's throw the question to you and add to it. California has issued a mandate to have companies diversify their boards. Do you agree with that as a policy, Ron?
That's a good question. I have mixed feelings about that, right? I agree with the desire and the intent of what the outcome, the expected outcome of that is. But I also always have an issue with forcing people to do things that they don't want to do, right? But if that's what it takes for boards to recruit people or companies to recruit people to include greater diversity on the boards, then that's what needs to be done. You take, for instance, you look at Gwen Moore, who passed away a few weeks ago, and so she sort of drove the sea change in California with was it 56? However they call it,
156.
right? 156, right? So that sort of changed the whole dynamic in California in terms of having to report and so that all of that information became public. And as that information became public, changes started to have to be made as a result of that. So I think the intent is good. And as I said, I personally always struggle with the notion of mandating certain types of things. But the reality is that you look at the history in this country, if certain things weren't mandated, they would never happen. And so that's my thought on that.
You wanted to follow up on something said earlier on.
I did. So, the interesting thing with respect to the feeling that I think many people of color, particularly Black people, have is a feeling of being overwhelmed, right? And I think that, and it's hard for people to understand that, right? And so you have somebody who dies or who gets killed on last night, and you go to work the next morning, and you're expected to be at work and be completely normal because that's not your family member or that's not, someone who you know directly. But people don't think about the impact that has on your psyche, on the pressure or the weight that you feel as a result of the compounding of these things happening. And with the confluence, as Paula mentioned, with COVID, that already raised the temperature for everyone across the nation, right? So people are coming to work with the pressures of, hey, is today my last day at work, right? Will I continue to have health care? Is today the day that I get COVID, or is today the day that my parents get COVID, or one of my children get COVID? How long will I continue to be able to work from home while my kids are home? And so there's a lot of things that I think people are dealing with, and I would say the positive of COVID is that it has sort of brought the humanity level up, I think, across the board. I think we all see each other now, um, through a different lens, because we're all going through the same struggle, right? And so some of these realities are the same for all of us, and that, to me, I think has not only impacted the healthcare conversation, it's impacting the education conversation. Um, because the reality is, you look at Miami-Dade, for instance. Miami-Dade County in Florida, they're having a huge issue with getting school going.
Right.
And so no matter what socioeconomic group you're part of, if you are a public school student in Miami-Dade, you are facing the same issue.
Yeah.
And so these are things that, as Paula, you mentioned, certain people have never had to deal with. And so it sort of levels the playing field, even though it's leveling the playing field for pain, but people are beginning to see the pain that others are going through. And so they're forced to walk in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah.
And so, just to add to one piece, I remember several years back when Trayvon Martin got killed, and I was at the commission then, and um, Art Graham, Commissioner Graham, decided that we had a prayer at the beginning of each meeting. We decided that we would have a moment of silence for Trayvon Martin,
Mhm.
and in the prayer we would include his family and so forth. And so that became a moment for us as commissioners to sort of talk about that and the impact of that. And so it was eye-opening to me as we engaged on that, yeah, and as we talked, I said, at the time, that's about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, my son was about maybe 7 or 8 back then. Um, and we talked about it, and I said, to some of my colleagues, you will probably never have top of mind that the first thing that comes to your mind, that when your son gets in a car and drives to wherever he's going, that you're concerned that a call that you're going to get is that, one, he got pulled over for whatever, right? And two, he's not making it home.
Yeah.
And he's not making it anywhere.
Yeah.
Where he's going is the morgue. And so so that concern is a real concern, right? And unless you've walked in somebody's shoes, it doesn't it doesn't crystallize for you until you begin to walk in somebody else's
Right.
shoes and see their experience. So I think there are all these opportunities for us to have these person-to-person conversations, to help people walk in each other's shoes, because I think that that's one of the biggest things that we can do, is help each other walk um, in each other's path.
It's a great point, Ron. And Paula, one of the things you and I have talked about in the past, because we might not walk in each other's shoes, you hear statements from people when you don't get that job or when you don't have that opportunity. It's not personal, right? You hear, it's not personal. It's not personal. Try again, do it again. And it is personal. It's personal to you. It's personal to you. And that constant need to explain our interest in something can be quite frustrating. One of the advantages I thought of having a diverse public service commission was that whoever was sitting in the audience, whether it was staff or a utility representative or someone who wanted to be a commissioner, could see through me or through Ron or through Commissioner Graham and others, and frankly, our Hispanic colleagues, could see through them an opportunity for them.
Yeah.
That and sometimes, we don't know that for years to come, but it always happens. Years later, you'll hear, I did that because I watched you or I saw you, or so in that regard, why is a diverse PSC important to you, Paula?
I think one, for the reason that you just shared, Lila, right? Because people need to see themselves represented, not only for their own personal paths, but the best way for the community at large to believe and feel as if the decisions that a commission makes is in their best interest, or not even necessarily in their best interest, but in the larger best interest, is to see people who see yourself represented in that group, and know that they understand what your life may be, and the sensitivities that you have. Um, it's hard to do that when you don't see yourself there. And the truth of the matter is, and we started this discussion, many people actually don't forget about knowing whether or not there is a public service commission, then trying to figure out exactly what you're supposed to do. So I can tell you, and I'm sure you as former commissioners have heard this, how many people I've heard say that the commission's job is to be a consumer advocate. And then I have to explain, actually, that's not their job. That's the consumer advocate's job. Well, the commission, all they care about is the company. Well, that's not actually true. Like it's a very, it's one of those roles that people just don't really understand it, but you're the public role, right? I can say that I'm mad at FPL, but I don't really have a person to point to at FPL because I don't know anybody. Like, I don't know who the CEO is. I don't know who's in charge of making those decisions. It's easy for me to say, well, I saw that Commissioner Brise was there, and I've got a face, I've got a name, it's a limited number of people, and I know he's a decision maker. But the only way I'm going to have a sense that the decisions he makes may be reflective of what I'm going through as a consumer is that I say, here's a brother who is walking through life with the same kind of societal struggles as he just outlined that I have. And I know, right, if I'm sitting in, oh, Commissioner Brise and Graham did a prayer for Trayvon Martin. Like, we need to acknowledge how highly unusual and at the same time incredibly powerful that moment. You describing it made it powerful for me.
Mm-hmm.
Never in a million years would I thought you would see something like that. But it is a way to subtly communicate with your customers and those that you are serving, that you are thinking about what their needs are just as much as you are thinking about what your companies, their shareholders and others' needs are. So I think it's important in both kinds of ways. And then I think finally, particularly for our industry, I just think we have a higher level of responsibility that our organizations, whether they are private companies, public companies, we have commissions, we need to be reflective of the communities that we serve. It is our obligation to do that. And it is really unfortunate that for industries that have been around for 100 years, we're just figuring out that that's a necessity. But how do you provide a service to every single person in the community where they don't get to choose if they want you or not? Like, you're it. You have an obligation then to reflect that community. I just think it's just really that simple. And that for companies who say, it's just really hard to find a blank engineer. It's just
Yes.
really hard to find a blank, right? Someone who speaks a certain language, all of that. My response is typically, I don't think you're really looking.
Well,
I
and
don't think
so
it's that
are
hard
you
to
getting,
find.
I don't know if you see the copies of the questions, Paula, but one of the questions we've just received is, what are your recommendations to find candidates that increase our diverse workforce?
I think, and so I think there are lots of things that organizations can do, right? So recruiting, if it's entry level roles and college roles, recruiting at HBCUs and listen, and our minority serving institutions. So if I'm in Florida, it's Florida International as well as FAMU. We should be recruiting at all of these schools. But for those organizations that say, you know what, I like only recruiting students from this University of Miami, then I would say, well, guess what? Black and brown kids go there too. And so you can find them there. And if you're working with a career center at the university
Right.
level, then you tell them what I am looking for is a diverse group of students that I can interview. And that if you can't use the network in this university to get me a diverse group, then you need to really rethink why you're going there to recruit. So I think that there's a bucket there. I think there are multiple, Abe, I think we have a jobs board. There are lots of organizations that have jobs board. We're a professional association, but there are tons of professional associations. And if it's Black MBAs, Black data scientists, journalists, attorney, like National Bar
And each
Association,
of us, I mean, that's part of
each of
the
us,
networking that we do.
right.
I get those calls all the time, and
Yeah,
I'm recommending people all the time. There's nothing wrong with using the
right.
network
Using
that
the
you have.
network. And so I think it's lazy when you say it's hard to find somebody. I just say, how hard could you
Where are
possibly
you
be
looking?
looking?
Mhm.
It's kind of like your kid. Like I think about this, like the kid who says, I can't find it. And you're like, it's in your room. I don't know where it is. And you're like, it's sitting right there. I don't see it. And your child could be staring right at it. And they're like, I don't see it. And you're like, are you kidding me? It's sitting right in front of you. We all have our own personal networks, but I think the challenge for organizations is to kind of get out of doing things the way that you normally do them. And then be honest about what your criteria is, right? There is not a job that requires people to have 25 different skill sets for you to qualify for that role. I don't believe that's true. But there are some skill sets that are required. And I think what we get into, and I'm sure someone can accuse me of the same thing, is right. I want the next person to do exactly what the previous person did with all the extra stuff that they had that I didn't know I wanted because the last person before them didn't do it. But I want the next person to have that stuff too. Without thought about, actually, what I really need is for you to be able to do 3 things really well, and the other stuff is nice to have, or I could teach you how to do it. But I think that culturally, you're a great fit for the organization. I think your personality fits really well with the way that my leadership style and how the team operates. I think, we need to think really carefully about the requirements that we put in place for roles for any candidate,
Right.
because I think it just really does us poorly. I'll just give you a quick example. When I started working at the electric company, my vice president was really interested in diversity, and she kept saying, company keeps saying they have a hard time finding African-American engineers. She met me through Abe, white woman.
Mm-hmm.
She said, I know your organization has Black engineers. Can you help us find some Black engineers? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'll connect you with whomever, blah, blah, blah. When we had the conversation with the HR person, their response was like, well, that's good, but we need somebody who knows how to use our system. And I said, but it's the light company. Like, aren't the systems basically the same? You produce an electron, you move it through some wires, and then people get it.
And can't we
like,
and can't
right.
you can learn?
And their
I hope that you can
response
learn
was,
the
yeah,
system.
but they have to know how to use our specific system. And I remember saying to my boss, and I said, so the truth is that what you really want is somebody who already works here,
Right,
to apply for this job, because there's no way I'm going to get somebody from someone outside if they have to be specific to what we're doing. And so in my mind, what that said is that you're actually really not interested. Right. And okay, thanks for telling me, because I don't need to go and recruit a bunch of people to be interested. And they were kind of like, no, that's not what we're saying. And I was like, well, no, that kind of is what you're saying if you have that level of requirement. And so I think that's what I mean by, like, let's just think about what we really need and have to have. Do you have to have an engineering degree to be a distribution super? Probably. Does it have to be, having done it at FP&L? Maybe not. Maybe if I did it at Con Ed, it would still kind of work. And so that's the kind of stuff that I think we need to really think about on that diversity issue.
And this is another place where I've seen good news related to companies devoting more time and energy, pardon the pun, to professionally develop from within. So
Yes.
If you do have a diverse workforce, you don't want to lose them. And so you might be cross-training them within the organization. You might be spending money and time to develop them in different areas. I think that's a great best practice, right? Everyone should have that opportunity. But if you have a targeted area of concern, then shouldn't you be fostering the growth of that person?
Absolutely. I think the data, right? The data is so important. And particularly when we're talking about, diversity specifically, which is there's the how do I recruit and who do I bring in, who do I retain, and then who gets to move up, who moves up and who moves out. And is there a true pipeline that allows people to move into progressive forms of leadership? And if there is, then what does that look like? And if I don't see diverse people kind of moving through the organization, whether it's laterally or, moving up, then I need to start asking. Then I think that then gets to a cultural question.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in the culture of this organization that somehow, explicitly or implicitly, we are biased and have only allowed certain individuals with certain types of qualifications to move into leadership roles, and we've left everybody else out.
Right. Well, in the time we've got left, let's self-reflect. So one of my pet peeves, just to lay the foundation for this question, Ron and Paula, my pet peeve is women who don't help women, right? And the same would be true with people of color not helping, other professionals of color, right? And we know it happens. And you both have heard me say it's really important that we all bring others along, because there's plenty of opportunity for all. And as when I created the Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum, I was very quick to recognize when I opened the forum, you might recall, I said, look, I've always been mentored and championed by men, and it's on their shoulders I stand. And we do have a lot of work to do, but we also have a lot of work in helping women understand that they can help other women. Mm-hmm. So as we self-reflect, what are some of those things that you've had to deal with in your own careers, and what do we each do to advance other professionals?
So I'll jump in. I'll just take the second part. And as a former commissioner, I think that commissioners play a large role in setting the table for certain things to happen, right? I mean, when you have the ability to make these types of decisions, people will do what is of interest to you, whether it's inside the rate case or outside the rate case, right? And I think anyone who's in that seat has to understand that and own that, right? And it takes a while for you to sort of.
Oh, Ron, you there?
Uh-oh.
We're in a
understand how to use, to understand it and how to leverage that. So a couple of things that I was interested in, as I mentioned before, was like, can we have more representation of people who look different, who appear before the commission, right? And so as time progressed, that changed, right? There was more diversity before the commission, but you also have the opportunity to support things or create space for companies to do things which are good and which they want to do. Like many companies during my time were doing programs and are still doing programs with middle school students and elementary school students to create that pipeline, so that question when it comes up, well, there aren't enough students or kids that are prepared to pass that test, so that they can become a lineman, right? Mm-hmm. So that you engage with those students early enough so that they understand the requirements, so that they could.
Paula, let me ask you to jump in here while we work on the technology.
Manage themselves accordingly.
Ron, we're losing you there a bit. I'm going to come right back to you.
Sure.
Paul, I know where Ron is going with this, from the power of the dais, right? Yes. As when he served on the commission, when I served on the commission, even questions that we really were just asking because we didn't know, took some action. Like either whether it was the staff or the utilities, they would take action in anticipation of what we were requesting. And so can you imagine a very purposeful question about diversity and inclusion, or procurement policies,
Yeah.
it helps when it's a African-American commissioner asking those questions.
It's incredibly meaningful, and it's meaningful for everybody, right? For the person who's sitting in the audience hearing that, right? When I worked regulatory affairs and I would hear these kinds of questions, I'd be like, uh-oh. And then I go back to my company and I'd say, are we doing this? Because this one's coming and we might as well get ready. But I think, to your peeve about women helping women or African Americans helping one another, I think there's a level of fearlessness that's required that says, A, I'm going to get out of my own head.
Right.
And B, I actually don't care what anybody thinks about it. And the B one is the one that gets really tough, right? You start to get worried about, well, what will people say if I only support women? They'll think that I only want to support women, or they only want to she only wants to support Black people. And what about the rest of us? And then you start to create your own narrative about what that says about you as a leader, about your role. And so I think it's just really important to stand firm and be clear on why you're doing what you're doing and not worry about it. So I understand that when people call me for recommendations, I know what they're looking for. They don't have to be like completely explicit, because you could call anybody. And for me, I'm interested in helping to get young people in the pipeline, but honestly, I'm far more interested in seeing my senior leaders become CEOs,
Right.
to see my mid-level managers become senior leaders, and to see my CEOs become members of boards. That's actually where my passion lies, because I'm surrounded by all these really brilliant people, and I'm just lucky enough to get the phone call. And I have to be okay with, as I have been, when someone has maybe called me about a board and told me what they were looking for, and I had to say, actually, I'm a terrible fit. I don't know anything about
Well, that explains what happens to those calls I send your way.
No,
Wow,
but
I
some of them
never
I
think I do that
am.
again.
Yeah, no, some of them I'm just like, I'm actually not the right person.
Yeah.
But I'm always able to identify an African American that I know would be a really great fit. And I'm okay with that. Like, I'm like, you know what? If this brother or sister gets it, I am going to be so daggone happy. And so, there's a little bit of that being fearless, and there's some of that being selfless, right? That there's room for everyone. And I think for me, the best outcome is seeing somebody go far beyond what I could have ever accomplished in my career, but that I gave a recommendation or I gave them the first nudge or push. Like, how great is that to sit back? For me, I think, wow, that's freaking amazing that's what happened by giving them that opportunity. Because in my own career, whenever I got a new opportunity, and I think you've heard me say this before, my goal was never to do a great job. My goal was always to make the person who recommended me proud. That's all I wanted to do, to be like, wow, I'm so glad I recommended her. She made me really proud. If I get that, I'm good.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you the last word, each of you. Ron, reflect on our entire conversation. In many ways, I know we're tired. We're very tired of saying it, but we have to. Yeah. We have to. Others need us to. And I know that both of you are leaders in this regard. So reflect, and what are the last words that we want our viewers to hear from each of you?
Sure. My thoughts are pretty simple. We have to be intentional about what we do. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. And so therefore, I'm hopeful that the confluence of the events of this year have brought into laser focus many of the things that people have not thought about. And so it gives us an opportunity to speak our truth. And while speaking in our truth and walking in our own skin comfortably, being intentional about the decisions that we make and how we impact others.
Thank you, Ron. Ms. Paula.
And I think I would say is, you know what, we're all tired. Get some rest and then keep going. Because our elders, right? John Lewis did this for 50 years and he still kept going. So, you know what, I'm prepared to I'll do my 50 as well. But if we really believe in what we're talking about and want to see something happen, get your rest and then keep it hopping.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paula, for all of your leadership,
Thank you
everything
so
you
much for
do
having me.
for all of us. And for my part, the Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum is just one vehicle. It's just one vehicle to create opportunities, one person at a time, for women in the industry, for students who are looking for their next career path. Our next forum is November 11th through the 13th, and we're holding it virtually. So you can go register at flwomeninenergy.com. We'd love to have you participate. And Paula, you can meet Eric Szilagyi if you want. Who's the
I'm
CEO.
already registered.
Yeah.
I registered
We'll
last week.
see you
So I'll see you guys
We'll see
there.
you there. Thank you so much. Please do register. Please come and meet these folks in person, virtually, albeit virtually, but we'd love to have you be part of it. Thank you for your leadership. Gunster, thank you for sponsoring, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you,
Thank
Lila, for
you.
your
Thank you.
leadership. Thank you so much.